I thought my roommate was just messy, until I caught him inside my locked bedroom, holding something he was never supposed to touch. That's when I realized he wasn't living with me, he was studying me. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who ends up posting on some AITA forum or even telling a long story about his roommate, but here I am, sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, staring at the dim light above the sink like it might give me answers I've never figured out on my own. I don't know when exactly things started going wrong between us, but I know when I started noticing the tension, the night I realized I felt more like a stranger in my own apartment than a person who lived there. When we first moved in together, things were simple. We weren't best friends or anything, but we got along well enough. He was the loud one, the social one, the guy who always knew a shortcut, always had a story, always had people around him. I wasn't jealous of that, honestly, I admired it. I've always been quieter, more comfortable blending into the background, keeping my routine simple, predictable. I didn't think our differences would ever lead to something bigger. I didn't think they'd grind against each other until sparks flew, the kind that burn instead of light anything meaningful. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like the apartment wasn't really mine anymore. I'd walk into the living room and find people I didn't know sitting on the couch, drinking beers I paid for because he told them to help themselves. I'd come home from work and smell something burnt in the kitchen, pots left in the sink, the counter sticky with whatever late-night experiment he'd cooked up and forgotten about. At first, I shrugged it off. Not worth a fight, I told myself. Not worth the awkwardness. But the small things pile up. The small things become big things without you even noticing it, until one day you realize you don't relax at home, you brace yourself. The first time I actually felt angry, not annoyed, not tired, but angry, was the night I found him sitting in my room with his laptop open on my desk. He brushed it off as if it were nothing. Bro, I just needed a quiet place to work. Quiet, because the living room was full of people again, all laughing, shouting over a movie someone had paused halfway through to argue about some joke I didn't even understand. My room was the last place that felt like mine, and even that had been taken without a second thought. I remember just standing there, feeling my jaw tighten, feeling something boil under my ribs, or maybe it had been boiling for a long time and that was the first moment I knew it. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just told him not to go into my room again. He grinned like I was kidding. Told me to chill. Those were his exact words, chill, dude. He walked past me like I was a doorframe. After that night, I couldn't unsee the pattern that had been invisible before. How he assumed everything was his by default, my food, my space, my time, my patience. How he'd invite people over at midnight without asking. How he'd borrow things and forget to return them. How he'd turn the TV as loud as possible when he knew I was trying to sleep. How he'd talk about our place like he owned the lease alone. But even then, even with all the irritation building up inside me like a slow-burning fuse, I didn't confront him. I didn't want to be the nagging roommate. I didn't want to be the guy who made everything awkward. I kept thinking, maybe it'll get better. Maybe I'll get used to it. Maybe I'm overreacting. I've spent most of my life second-guessing my feelings, wondering if my discomfort is real enough to matter. I guess this situation wasn't any different. Then things escalated, slowly but steadily, until I reached a point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. But the moment everything truly tipped over, the moment that made me realize this wasn't just a roommate issue but something deeper and darker, was the night I came home to find my bedroom door wide open again, the lights on, and him standing at my dresser with something in his hands. Something of mine. And the worst part wasn't even what he was holding. It was the way he looked at me. Like he had a right to be there. Like I was the intruder. That was the first moment I felt genuinely afraid of someone I lived with. And that's where everything began to unravel. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there in the doorway, my hand still on the knob, watching him casually flip through the contents of my drawer like he had every right to be there. He didn't even look startled. He didn't slam the drawer shut. He didn't jump or mutter an excuse. He just glanced over his shoulder, lifted his chin, and said, "Oh, hey man. You were supposed to be home later." As if that explained anything. As if that made it normal. As if my schedule existed solely to make breaking into my room more convenient for him. I stepped inside slowly, trying to keep my voice even. "What are you doing?" He shrugged, completely unfazed. "Just looking for that charger you said I could borrow." "I never said you could borrow anything from my room," I said. He rolled his eyes. "Dude, relax. It's just a charger." But it wasn't just a charger. He wasn't even holding a charger. He was holding an old watch my father gave me when I turned 18, something I never wore because I didn't trust myself not to lose it. Something with actual emotional weight, something that shouldn't be in his hands under any circumstance. "That's not a charger," I said quietly. He looked down, as if he'd just noticed it. "Oh. Yeah. I saw this and figured I'd check it out." "Chill, man. I wasn't gonna steal it or anything." I felt something inside me snap, but not loudly. More like a thin wire giving way after being pulled too tight for too long. I took the watch from his hand without asking. He didn't resist. He didn't care. That made it worse somehow. I wanted to yell. For the first time since we started living together, I wanted to actually raise my voice and tell him how wrong it was, how disrespectful, how invasive. But the words stuck in my throat, turning into a tightness in my chest that made speaking feel impossible. Instead, I placed the watch back into the drawer and closed it carefully, like I was afraid it might shatter if I handled it too roughly. "Get out," I finally said. He laughed under his breath. "Seriously? You're kicking me out of your room like I'm a kid? Get out." Maybe he finally heard the edge in my voice, because he lifted his hands in a mock surrender and walked past me, shaking his head like I was the one being unreasonable. When he brushed by, he muttered something I barely caught. "You've been so weird lately, man. Weird. Weird for wanting privacy. Weird for wanting boundaries. Weird for not wanting strangers in my home every night. Weird for not wanting my things touched, used, or broken. I closed the door behind him and locked it, something I hadn't done in months. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door as if expecting him to come back. My heart thumped unevenly, this awful, unsteady rhythm that made my hands shake. I felt violated in a way that surprised me, a tight, suffocating discomfort that made me realize this wasn't just a roommate problem. This was a respect problem. A trust problem. A safety problem. And beneath all of that, something else, shame. Shame that I'd let it get this far. Shame that I hadn't said something sooner. Shame that I'd convinced myself I was overreacting when every sign had been there all along. I stayed in my room the rest of the night, listening to him stomp around the apartment, muttering to himself, slamming cupboards loudly enough that it was obviously intentional. He didn't try to talk to me again. He didn't apologize. He didn't even pretend to feel guilty. If anything, he acted like he was the one who'd been wronged, like my reaction was the problem, not his actions. The next morning, he was sitting at the kitchen table when I came out to make coffee. He didn't look at me, but he spoke the moment I stepped into the room. You know, he said, swirling a spoon in his cereal, this whole vibe you've got lately is making the apartment really tense. I don't know what's going on with you, but you're kinda ruining the energy here. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. I'm ruining the energy. He shrugged. Yeah. Man, you're so uptight lately. Like, seriously. I said I didn't mean anything by it. Why are you making it such a big deal? Because you were in my room. Because you touched my things. Because you don't think I deserve privacy. Because you don't think I deserve respect. Because you don't think I deserve boundaries. Because you don't see me as a person, just an inconvenience. But I didn't say any of that. I just poured my coffee quietly and retreated back to my room, the only place that still felt like mine, even though the lock suddenly felt too thin and too breakable. It wasn't until later that day that I noticed something else missing, something important. Something that made the anger and fear twist into something darker, something more urgent. My spare apartment key. The one I kept in the back of my drawer. Gone. That's when I realized this situation was no longer just uncomfortable. It was dangerous. I stared at the empty space in my drawer for a long time before my mind managed to catch up with what I was seeing. The spare apartment key wasn't just misplaced. It wasn't under the receipts, or beneath an old charging cable, or fallen behind the drawer lining. It was gone. Cleanly, deliberately, unmistakably gone. I knew exactly where it had been. I knew exactly how it had been placed, tucked inside a folded piece of paper so it wouldn't jingle around. And now that paper lay open and empty like a clue in a bad thriller movie. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was fear. Cold, sharp, immediate fear. He had been in my drawer. He had touched my things. He had stood right here, in my room, holding my belongings like they were his own. And now he had a key to the place I lived. A key I never gave him. I sat on my bed, the reality of it washing over me in slow, suffocating waves. How long had he been taking things? How many times had he come in here without me knowing? How much of my privacy had I imagined I still had, even when it might have been gone long ago? The thought made my skin crawl, a prickling sensation that traveled from the back of my neck down to my fingertips. I tried to convince myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he moved the key for some reason I didn't understand. Maybe he planned to return it. Maybe he didn't take it at all, and I had simply misplaced it. But the lie fell apart immediately. I don't lose things. Not important things. Not things I check regularly. And no matter how many times I opened and closed the drawer, hoping the key would magically appear, it didn't. I felt the anger then, simmering beneath the fear. A slow, rising burn that made my breath tighten. I needed to confront him. But when I stepped out of my room, ready to demand answers, I stopped dead in the hallway. He was standing in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, talking on speakerphone to someone. His voice was loud, animated, annoyed. I don't know what his deal is, dude, he said. He's been acting paranoid as hell. I think he's losing it or something. I froze. He freaked out last night because I grabbed a charger, he continued. Like, bro, relax. You're not that important. A laugh echoed from the phone speaker. No, seriously, he added. He's been super weird. I might need to talk to the landlord about it. If he's gonna be like this, maybe I need the place for myself. My heart thudded so loudly I wondered if the person on the other end could hear it through the walls. I backed up slowly, silently, until my back touched my bedroom door. My breath felt trapped in my throat. He was already thinking about replacing me. No, worse. He was trying to make me look unstable. Trying to rewrite the story before I could even speak. I slipped back into my room and shut the door. Not slammed, not loudly, but with the softest click I could manage. I pressed my hands against the wood and felt a tremor run through me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining this. He was escalating things. He was twisting the narrative. And now he had a key that could let him into my room, or the apartment, whenever he wanted. I paced, trying to compose my thoughts. Should I confront him? Should I call the landlord first? Should I take the day off work and change the locks myself? Every option felt risky. Every option felt like it had consequences. If I pushed too hard, he might retaliate. If I didn't push at all, he'd keep taking more from me. The balance between standing up for myself and avoiding disaster felt impossibly thin. Hours later, when he finally left the apartment with the same loud slam of the door he always used, I let myself breathe again. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote out everything that had happened since we moved in, the late-night parties, the people he brought over, the things he borrowed without asking, the room invasions, the key. It felt ridiculous and dramatic to write it all down, but seeing it on paper made something click inside me. This wasn't normal. This wasn't roommate friction. This wasn't just personality differences. This was a boundary violation that had been escalating for months. I knew I needed help, or at least clarity. So I called my best friend, someone who'd known me long enough to tell when I was overthinking and when I wasn't. He answered on the second ring. "What's up?" I hesitated, unsure how to begin. "I think I have a problem with my roommate." He laughed lightly. "Doesn't everyone?" "No," I said, my voice tight. "I think mine is dangerous." The laugh stopped. He listened silently as I told him everything, the parties, the disrespect, the drawer incident, the missing key, the phone conversation I overheard. By the time I finished, my voice felt raw. There was a long pause. "Dude," he said finally, "this guy is messing with you." "I know," I whispered. "No, I mean really messing with you. You need to call your landlord right now. Like today. This isn't safe." I swallowed hard. "What if I'm overreacting?" "You're not," he said immediately. "He stole your key. He went through your stuff. He tried to paint you as unstable. He's setting something up, man. I don't know what, but it's not good." Hearing someone else say it, clearly, confidently, shook something loose inside me. Validation. Relief. Fear. All tangled together. "I'll call the landlord," I said quietly. "Good," he replied. "And if you need a place to crash tonight, my couch is empty." I thanked him, hung up, and immediately dialed the landlord. That was the moment everything began to shift. And not in the way I expected. Calling the landlord felt like the logical next step, but as I listened to the phone ring, my palms began to sweat. Every instinct inside me was on high alert, like I was stepping into a confrontation I wasn't prepared for. When the landlord finally picked up, his voice was as gruff and uninterested as ever, a sound I usually found annoying but now strangely grounding. I explained everything as clearly as I could, trying to keep my tone calm, factual, reasonable. But the more I talked, the more desperate I sounded even to myself. He didn't interrupt, not once. He just listened. When I finished, there was a brief pause that stretched on a second too long. "So you're saying he took your key?" he asked slowly. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure of it." Another pause. "And he's been entering your room without permission?" "Yes. And there have been issues." "That's one way to put it." He let out a long breath, the kind that says someone's trying to decide how much trouble they're willing to take on. "Look," he said finally, "I can change the locks, but I need to talk to him first." My stomach dropped. Exactly what I didn't want. "Can't we just handle it without him knowing it was me who called?" I asked, already knowing how pathetic that sounded. He chuckled humorlessly. "You live together, kid. He's gonna know." I closed my eyes, feeling the dread settle deep in my chest. The landlord cleared his throat. "I'll come by tomorrow morning," he said. "Make sure you're both home." "Both home." Great. When I hung up, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. It felt like every decision I made only escalated things further. I knew logically I'd done the right thing, protecting myself, setting boundaries, but emotionally it felt like I was lighting a fuse that would burn straight back toward me. He came home an hour later. I was sitting on the couch pretending to scroll on my phone. Trying to look casual. But the moment he walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. Not visibly wrong, he wasn't angry, he wasn't loud, but the air shifted. He closed the door quietly, which was unusual for him, then set his backpack down without looking at me. He stood there for a moment, leaning on the counter with his back half turned, as if deciding which version of himself he wanted to use on me. Then he spoke. "So," he said slowly, "I heard you were talking to some people." My chest tightened. "Who?" He turned around, and there was a smile on his face I'd never seen before. Not friendly. Not mocking. Something colder. Something calculated. "Doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is, you're making things complicated." I felt a jolt of fear shoot through me. Complicated how? He stepped closer, not threateningly, but with the sort of confidence that makes you want to step back. "You know I can hear things, right? Walls are thin. You're not exactly subtle." My heart pounded. What had he heard? What had I said out loud? He tilted his head, studying me. "If you've got something to say to me, say it. Don't go behind my back." I swallowed hard. "You took my key." His smile widened just slightly. "Did I?" "Yes," I said, forcing the word out. "You were in my room. You went through my stuff. You took my key." He stared at me silently for a long moment, completely still. Then he laughed, a soft, dismissive laugh that made my skin crawl. "You're imagining things, man. You've been stressed. Work, life, whatever. You're projecting." I clenched my fists. "I'm not imagining it." He shrugged. "Prove it." Those two words hit me harder than anything he'd said before. Prove it. Not deny it. Not argue it. Dare me. Challenge me. Corner me. I took a step backward without meaning to. Something about the way he was looking at me, not angry, not defensive, but amused, made the entire apartment feel too small, too quiet, too unsafe. "I talked to the landlord," I said, trying to inject confidence into my voice. His expression shifted, barely, but enough for me to notice. A flicker of irritation. Then it was gone. So tomorrow, he said, he comes here. Yes. Another silence. He sucked in a slow breath, then nodded as if coming to a decision. Fine, he said. We'll clear things up. But just so you know, man, if you're trying to make me look bad, it's not gonna go the way you think. I felt a cold wave wash through me. What does that mean? But he didn't answer. He just went to his room and shut the door with a soft click. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the closed door, every instinct inside me screaming that tomorrow wasn't going to be the simple conversation the landlord imagined. My roommate wasn't planning to defend himself. He was planning something else. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake in my room, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every shift of weight behind the thin wall that separated our bedrooms. I kept thinking about the missing key. About him standing in my room. About the tone he used when he said things wouldn't go the way I thought. At around 4 in the morning, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid of losing my apartment anymore. I was afraid of staying in it. The landlord was supposed to come at 9. I didn't sleep a minute. By the time the sun started to push through the blinds, my nerves were shredded, my thoughts frayed into thin strands that barely held together. Every sound in the apartment felt amplified, the hum of the fridge, the pipes groaning, my roommate's footsteps moving casually around the kitchen as if nothing was wrong. He was whistling. That alone made my stomach twist into a tight knot. He whistled when he wanted to annoy someone. He whistled when he wanted to assert dominance without saying a word. It was a childish habit, but in that moment it felt like a taunt. At 8:50, I stepped into the hallway and saw him leaning against the counter, arms crossed, waiting. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look guilty. He looked eager. Like he was excited for the confrontation. Like this was a game he knew he'd already won. You ready for showtime? He asked, grinning. It's not a show, I said quietly. Then stop acting like it is. Before I could respond, there was a knock on the door. My heartbeat jumped into my throat. He walked over and opened it with exaggerated friendliness. Hey, man, he said to the landlord. Come on in. Glad you could make it. The landlord stepped inside, looking tired and mildly irritated, his default state. He glanced between the two of us, then cleared his throat. So, he said, I've been told there are issues. I swallowed hard. My roommate didn't. He stepped forward immediately, cutting me off before I could even speak. Yeah, he said, adopting a concerned tone that sounded painfully rehearsed. I'm actually glad you're here. I've been worried about him. My blood ran cold. The landlord frowned. Worried? About what? My roommate sighed dramatically, as if this were exhausting for him. He's been really paranoid lately. Accusing me of doing things I didn't do. Saying I'm stealing from him, sneaking into his room. Honestly, I think he's stressed out, but it's creating a really toxic environment. I stared at him in disbelief. He didn't stumble. He didn't hesitate. He lied with the ease of breathing, each word perfectly placed, each expression perfectly calibrated. It's not true, I said immediately, turning to the landlord. He took my key. My roommate laughed. See? This is exactly what I'm talking about. He thinks I stole his key. I don't even know what he's referring to. I felt heat rising in my chest. You were in my room. I saw you. You went through my drawer. I went in once, he admitted, still playing the calm one, to grab a charger he told me I could borrow. He freaked out about it. Ever since then, he's been acting like I'm breaking into his room every night. That's not what happened. The landlord raised a hand. One at a time. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. My roommate continued before I could. I'm not trying to make this a big thing, he said, shrugging with false humility. I just want a peaceful living situation. But he's been creating tension, locking his door every night, whispering on the phone. Yesterday he said he wanted the locks changed because he thinks I stole something. You did. I snapped. My spare key is gone. He sighed and covered his face with his hand, shaking his head. I honestly don't know what to say anymore. He misplaces things sometimes. He gets anxious. I think he genuinely believes what he's saying, and that's what worries me. The landlord looked at me, really looked at me, and I realized how this must have sounded. One calm, collected person. One exhausted, stressed, sleep-deprived person. One voice relaxed and steady. One voice shaky and strained. My roommate had flipped the script perfectly. Do you have proof? The landlord asked me. The words hit like a punch to the gut. No, I admitted. He nodded slowly. Without proof, there isn't much I can do. I felt the room tilt slightly, a wave of dizziness washing over me. My roommate clapped his hands once, lightly, as if concluding a meeting. So, he said, maybe we can all just agree to communicate better. His tone was so falsely cheerful that bile rose in my throat. No, I said. I don't feel safe here. That sentence changed the atmosphere instantly. The landlord's brows furrowed. My roommate's smile faded, not into guilt, but into something darker. Safe, he repeated quietly. From what? From you, I said. Silence. Then he stepped toward me, slow and deliberate, his face unreadable. If you want me gone, he said softly, say it. I didn't speak. Say it, he repeated, louder. I opened my mouth, but the landlord cut in. All right, he said firmly, enough. Everyone calmed down. But neither of us did. We just stared at each other, two people who had once shared a space and now stood on opposite ends of something that felt like a fault line ready to split. The landlord rubbed his face. Here's what we're going to do. You two need space. I'll draft paperwork so one of you can leave the lease early. I don't care which one. But this situation is not sustainable. He left. My roommate closed the door without a word. We stood in the hallway, the air thick between us. You really messed up, he said quietly. And then he smiled. A smile I will never forget. Not angry. Not mocking. Triumphant. That's when I understood. He wasn't afraid of losing the apartment. He was afraid of losing control. And now he thought he had it back. But he was wrong. Because I wasn't done. After the landlord left and the door clicked shut, the silence in the apartment became unbearable. Not the comfortable silence of two people living their own lives, this was charged, heavy, watchful. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, trying to steady my breathing, while my roommate lingered near the kitchen, pretending to scroll on his phone but clearly waiting for me to make the next move. He wasn't smiling anymore. That was somehow worse. I retreated to my room and locked the door, even though the lock felt laughably inadequate knowing he still had the spare key. I placed a chair under the doorknob like some cliché thriller character, and for the first time since I was a kid, I felt genuinely unsafe in a place I was supposed to call home. The walls felt too thin. The shadows too dark. Every creak of the floorboards on his side of the apartment made me jump. I sat on my bed staring at my phone, scrolling through the conversation I'd had with my best friend the night before. His last message glowed on the screen. If you need to get out, get out. My couch is open. I thought about leaving right then, grabbing a backpack, stuffing some clothes into it, and walking out. But a part of me resisted. Because leaving now would feel like surrender. Like confirming the story my roommate was trying so hard to build, that I was unstable, paranoid, incapable of handling the situation. I didn't want him to win. I didn't want him to control the narrative any longer. But I also didn't want to end up as the guy on a true crime podcast whose roommate said he always seemed a little off. In the end, the decision wasn't made by logic or pride. It was made by instinct. I needed to get out. I texted my friend, on my way. Then I quietly started packing. Essentials only. A few clothes. My important documents. Laptop. Phone charger. Anything sentimental or irreplaceable went into a small backpack that I kept close to my chest, as if my roommate might burst into the room to snatch them away. Every sound on the other side of the wall made my heart jolt, but he didn't approach. Not yet. When I was ready, I waited by the door, listening for signs of movement. The apartment was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I slowly pulled the chair away from the door and unlocked it. The hinge creaked faintly, a sound I had never noticed before, but I winced as if it were a gunshot. I stepped into the hallway. Empty. The kitchen light was off. The living room TV was silent. The air felt still and stale. I walked quickly to the front door, trying not to make noise, as if noise alone might provoke something. When I grabbed the doorknob, my hand shook. I opened the door just enough to slip through. Then a voice behind me froze me in place. Running away. My entire body went rigid. I turned slowly, and there he was, leaning against the hallway wall, half in shadow, arms folded. No smile now. Just a cold, unreadable expression. I'm not running, I said, though my voice betrayed me. I'm leaving for the night. For the night, he repeated softly. Right. I swallowed hard. You have my key. I want it back. He tilted his head. Do I? Yes. He stepped forward, not close enough to touch me, but close enough that I felt cornered. You're really committed to that story, huh? Even after the landlord said there's no proof. I tried to hold his gaze, but something in his eyes made my stomach twist. Not anger. Not guilt. Something calmer. Something calculating. Give me the key, I said again. He reached into his pocket, slowly. My pulse spiked, but then he pulled out, nothing. He lifted his empty hand and shrugged. Guess you lost it, he said. Happens. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I stepped out of the apartment and closed the door behind me. He didn't follow. He didn't call after me. He didn't slam anything. That silence was somehow more terrifying than any outburst could have been. When I reached my friend's place, the moment I walked inside, something in me snapped. I didn't cry, not exactly, but my chest loosened in a way it hadn't in months. For the first time, I realized how much tension I'd been holding inside my body just to survive being in that apartment. Over the next few days, the landlord called me with updates. He said he'd spoken with my roommate again. That things didn't add up. That my roommate's story changed each time he told it. That other tenants reported hearing yelling, thuds, strange arguments. That my roommate had been complaining about me long before I said anything, building a narrative that made me look unstable. That was the turning point. The landlord offered me the opportunity to stay and asked him to leave the lease. But I said no. I didn't want that apartment anymore. I didn't want those walls. I didn't want to sleep in a room he had entered. I didn't want to wonder whether he'd copied the key. I didn't want to carry the weight of that space. So I left. Officially. Fully. On my own terms. Now, weeks later, sitting in a small but peaceful studio apartment, I finally feel like I can breathe. Like I'm safe. Like I'm allowed to reclaim the space in my head that he had taken inch by inch without me noticing. I'm still angry sometimes. I'm still shaken sometimes. I still double-check the locks more than I probably should. But I'm healing. I'm learning to trust myself again. I'm learning that walking away isn't losing. It's choosing myself. And honestly, after everything that happened, That's the first choice I'm proud of making in a very long time.